I'm Emily Carter, 32, the daughter who was always told to be grateful for stability. In my family, brilliance meant spotlight Jessica the attorney, applauded at every turn, while I was the afterthought, the safe choice, the one no one bragged about. That mask cracked the day my father suggested I'd make the perfect paralegal for Jessica, his tone sincere, as if my only worth was standing behind her. Ever been erased in your own family story? Hit like if you've ever been treated as invisible, and comment if someone else always took the spotlight meant for you. For me, it all began on a summer afternoon at the BBQ, where the smell of grilled burgers carried not warmth, but humiliation. The summer air clung heavy to my skin, sweet with barbecue smoke and the faint echo of laughter that never quite included me. Year after year, this gathering unfolded the same way: lawn chairs scattered across the yard, paper plates stacked by the cooler, relatives finding comfort in tradition. And yet for me, tradition meant comparison. I could almost hear it before the words left anyone's lips. Jessica, the golden child, and me, the shadow cast in her light. I leaned against the thick oak tree at the edge of the backyard, its bark rough against my palm, grounding me in the chaos of voices. From here I could see everything: the picnic tables sagging under trays of potato salad and ribs, the uncles clumped together near the grill with beers in hand, my parents hovering at the center like proud hosts orchestrating a show. They didn't notice me standing there, not really. They never did. Their attention, as always, belonged elsewhere. "Did you hear about Jessica's latest case?" My mother's voice rose above the chatter. Susan Carter had a way of projecting, of making her pride unavoidable. Her firm is letting her second chair a trial already. At her age, can you believe it? The cousins nodded. Aunts clapped. An approving murmur rippled through the circle. My father, Richard, chimed in with his baritone. "She's not just smart, she's relentless. That's our girl." I tugged at the hem of my sundress, staring down at the grass. I'd gotten a quiet promotion at my office job 2 months ago, project lead, managing a small team. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I'd worked nights, sacrificed weekends, built trust brick by brick until someone noticed. But here, among family, that kind of achievement didn't make a sound. It was invisible. "Emily's still at that little company, right?" Aunt Margaret asked, her tone casual, dismissive, as though I were an afterthought. "What is it again, honey? Something with computers?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I said, forcing a smile. "I lead a team now. We're developing—" "Oh, that's nice." She cut me off, her eyes already drifting back to Jessica, who had just arrived at the patio steps, glowing like she'd rehearsed her entrance. Navy dress, polished hair, confident stride. She carried the effortless aura of someone who knew the room belonged to her. I shrank further into the shade of the oak. My parents moved to embrace her, their voices bright with excitement. "There she is, the star!" Richard boomed, clapping Jessica on the back. "Tell everyone about that big case, sweetheart. They'll be amazed." I could almost predict the script. Jessica would downplay her success, at first humble, relatable. Then someone would coax details, and soon the entire crowd would hang on her every word. I'd seen it play out so many times it felt like reruns of a show I'd been forced to watch. I turned my gaze to the table of condiments. Anything to avoid her rehearsed charm. But voices carried. "Honestly," Jessica laughed, "it's nothing too exciting. Just a small trial. Well, okay, maybe not small." And with that, the circle leaned closer. I tried to sip my lemonade, but the sweetness turned sour. My heart beat louder than the music drifting from the Bluetooth speaker. I thought of my office, the spreadsheets, the late-night brainstorms that shaped real projects, real outcomes. None of it seemed to matter. Not here. Uncle George joined the chorus, slapping Jessica on the shoulder. "We're all so proud of you. You've set the bar high for the family. Isn't that right, Emily?" His gaze found me across the yard, a spotlight I never wanted. I straightened, nodded stiffly. "Yes, she's done well." The words scratched my throat, brittle and forced. The laughter rolled on. A cousin muttered something about my job being safe, at least, like it was a consolation prize. Another relative asked me if I ever thought about going back to school, maybe trying for law like Jessica. Every remark was a reminder that in their eyes I had settled. I pressed my back harder into the oak, willing it to swallow me whole. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the lawn, but the fire of humiliation only grew hotter. My parents floated between relatives like proud diplomats, their chests puffed with Jessica's glory. When they finally passed close enough to me, I caught their words. "Emily helps with admin, I think." Keeps busy, you know. Admin. As if my career, my work, my sleepless nights boiled down to staplers and memos, I opened my mouth to correct them, to remind them I was more than paperwork. But before I could, laughter erupted again. Cousin Dave, grinning wide with a beer in hand, delivered the final blow. So, Emily's the family secretary now, huh? The group roared with amusement, their faces lit by the sinking sun, their laughter digging deeper than any insult. Something inside me twisted. Shame burned through my veins, hot and undeniable. My chest rose and fell too quickly, and I fought to keep my expression still, my body anchored against the oak. No one noticed my silence. No one noticed the way my nails pressed crescents into my palm. They only turned back to Jessica, eager for the next highlight reel. The grill hissed, the music swelled, and the night carried on without me, as it always did. But as I stood there, the sting of their words sharp in my ears, a thought settled heavy in my chest, not fleeting, not fragile. It was steel, forged from years of being overlooked. One day, they will know. Jessica arrived late, but every gaze snaps to her like she was royalty. The patio lights had begun to glow against the settling dusk, casting a golden hue over the yard. Conversation faltered, laughter thinned, and heads turned in unison toward the figure at the gate. She had mastered entrances like this, whether intentional or not. The tilt of her chin, the sway of her navy dress, the confidence in her stride. My parents hurried toward her as if they'd been waiting all night for this exact moment. And maybe they had. The air still carried the sting of Cousin Dave's family secretary joke from earlier, but now that sting blended with the familiar rhythm of being eclipsed. Every summer ended this way, Jessica stepping in like a second sun, everyone adjusting their orbit around her glow. I stayed near the oak tree again, but this time I didn't retreat into the shadows. I watched. "Oh, honey, there you are." Susan's voice brightened like a bell. She brushed Jessica's hair back from her face, as if she were still a little girl instead of a 30-year-old attorney. Richard clasped her shoulder with pride only a father reserves for a favored child. "Tell them, Jess. Tell them the news." Jessica gave a half-smile, feigning modesty. "Well, it looks like the firm's placing me on the partner track." A chorus of gasps and congratulations rippled through the crowd. Beer cans clinked together. Aunt Margaret's hands fluttered dramatically. Even the children stopped running long enough to stare at the spectacle of success. I shifted the paper plate in my hands, the coleslaw sliding toward the corner. Partner track. It sounded like a coronation. They heard those words and crowned her queen all over again. No one asked about the hours she worked, the compromises she made, or the people she might have stepped on to climb. They only saw the title, and the title was everything. Grandma Mildred shuffled over, a soft cardigan draped across her shoulders despite the heat. She peered at me over her glasses, kind but detached, the way someone might look at a distant neighbor. "Emily, dear," she said, patting my hand, "could you come by sometime to fix my printer? It hasn't worked for months." The words sank into me like stones in water. Jessica announced partner track. I was assigned printer duty. I forced a thin smile. "Of course, Grandma. I'll look at it next week." My throat burned. Before I could retreat, Susan swept past, balancing a tray of lemonade. She paused long enough to pat my arm, eyes brimming with condescension. "At least you have something stable, dear. These days, stability is a blessing." She meant it as comfort, I think, but it landed as dismissal. A sentence dressed as kindness but dripping with pity. I looked across the yard at Jessica, encircled by relatives who hung on every detail. She was describing the trial schedule, the senior partners, the corner office they hinted might soon be hers. Each word tightened a coil in my chest. Richard's voice cut across the chatter, booming with certainty. "You know what, Emily?" He smiled, oblivious to the weight of his words. "You could be Jessica's paralegal. Work together, sisters, side by side. Wouldn't that be perfect?" The suggestion hit me harder than Cousin Dave's secretary jab. It wasn't a joke this time. It was worse. It was sincere. In his mind, it was a gift. To them, my entire worth could be condensed into standing behind Jessica, holding her files, nodding as she argued her cases. I felt the oaks bark at my back again, grounding me against the sudden rush of humiliation. My chest rose and fell too quickly. The faces around us lit up with agreement, no one questioning the assumption that I should orbit closer to Jessica, that I should be grateful to be folded into her shadow. But not every face. Across the yard, Aunt Carol sat at the picnic table, quiet as ever. She wasn't clapping, wasn't nodding along with the others. Instead, she looked at me, her eyes steady, unreadable. It wasn't pity, it wasn't pride, it was something else. Something I couldn't decipher. A flicker that unsettled me even more than the ridicule. The plate in my hands trembled slightly as I stared back at her, wondering what she saw, what she knew, and why she was the only one not smiling. Aunt Carol glances at Emily, something unreadable in her eyes. They saw a clerk. In truth, I was the one signing paychecks. The words circled in my head as I stared out from the 31st floor of Innovate Solutions, my company, my creation, the empire no one at that barbecue believed existed. Below, downtown traffic pulsed through the arteries of the city, a different rhythm from the backyard laughter and clinking beer bottles. Here, I wasn't the secretary. Here, I was the one steering millions of dollars, negotiating deals that could change industries. The glass conference table gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights as my team gathered. Sarah, sharp-eyed and always 3 steps ahead, tapped at her tablet, lining up the agenda. Mark leaned back with his trademark casualness, but the charts he'd prepared on the product's performance showed weeks of obsessive refinement. Dana, impeccable in a crimson blazer, shuffled through mock-ups for the upcoming campaign. This was my arena. "All right," I said, sliding into the head chair, voice steady, practiced. "The launch is 2 weeks away. Mark, show us the numbers." He projected the charts across the screen: upticks, retention, promising beta feedback. My chest swelled with something no family barbecue could give me. Quiet vindication. Here, my word carried weight, and every eye tracked me not because of my last name but because of my authority. "Dana," I continued, "your campaign proposal?" She launched into a polished pitch: billboards, targeted ads, influencer partnerships. The room hummed with energy. Yet even as excitement coursed around the table, a single vibration on my phone snapped me back. Investor email. I opened it under the table. The words tightened like a noose. Need stronger legal structure before Series C closes. Ensure counsel of top-tier credibility. Another ping. Concerned about compliance risk, don't jeopardize valuation. Series C. Tens of millions on the line. Months of preparation hinged not on code, not on campaigns, but on the one thing I'd hoped to avoid. The firm behind the paperwork. The lawyers who would stand as guardians at the gate. I kept my face neutral as Mark wrapped up. "This product will redefine workflow automation," he said, smiling as though nothing could stop us. If only enthusiasm could soothe investors. I nodded but shifted focus. "Sarah, we need legal counsel immediate. Start compiling a short list of firms with credibility at the investor level. No boutique firms this time." She typed rapidly, her nails clacking against glass. "Got it. I'll reach out to top-tier firms. We need someone with name recognition, someone who screams legitimacy." The conversation moved on to smaller details, QA schedules, media outreach, but my attention kept drifting to those emails. I had built this company from my apartment floor, nurtured it through sleepless nights, survived near-death cash flows. To think it could collapse not because of innovation, but because of legal clout gnawed at me. By the time the meeting closed, Sarah already had a list open. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Emily, one firm keeps coming up. Thorne and Associates. They've got the weight. Investors will be reassured immediately." I froze. The name landed like a stone in my stomach. The syllables tasted of every summer where Jessica's accolades were toasted while my own were ignored. Thorne and Associates, Jessica's kingdom. The pen slipped from my hand. My team didn't notice the fraction of a second where the CEO facade cracked, where the humiliation of the barbecue collided with the reality of this office. Sarah, oblivious, kept typing. "I'll schedule a meeting first thing tomorrow. It could save the round." My throat tightened. A wall of glass separated me from the skyline, but no wall could shield me from the collision hurtling my way. Sarah schedules Thorne and Associates meeting. Emily freezes at the name Jessica's firm. At home, I was invisible. At work, I couldn't afford to be. That thought carried me through the glass doors of Innovate Solutions the next morning, my reflection a blur against the lobby's marble floors. The hum of the office was relentless, phones buzzing, keyboards clicking, Mark hunched over his laptop muttering code fixes, Dana pacing with a headset as she fielded an impatient reporter. Deadlines hovered like thunderclouds, and the investors' warnings beat against my ribs harder than the caffeine in my veins. The boardroom smelled faintly of coffee grounds and dry erase markers. A countdown glared at us from the screen. 12 days until launch. Mark's charts showed a bottleneck in back-end scalability. Dana waved her mock-ups, her voice sharp with urgency. We cannot delay the campaign. The press window is set. The investors hadn't eased off either. 3 more emails flagged red in my inbox, all circling back to one demand: credible legal counsel. The kind of credibility that only Jessica's firm carried. I leaned over the table, steady but taut. We need this round closed. If we miss Series C, payroll dries up in 6 weeks. Every hour counts. The room went quiet. For a moment, I saw the flicker of doubt in their eyes, the possibility that I wasn't invincible. I shoved it down, because here, I wasn't the family scapegoat. Here, I was CEO, and hesitation was a luxury I couldn't afford. But back home, hesitation was all they saw. The Carter dining room was warm with the smell of roast chicken, clinking silverware, and the undercurrent of judgment that flavored every meal. Richard sat at the head of the table, carving meat with a flourish, while Susan passed mashed potatoes down the line. Jessica wasn't there, but her presence filled the space anyway, summoned in every conversation. Susan dabbed at her mouth with a napkin, her tone light and dagger sharp. Emily, dear, Jessica mentioned she could help you find a real job if you're ready. Something stable. Something you can depend on. The fork in my hand wobbled, metal scraping against porcelain. As though the company I had built, the dozens of employees whose rent depended on me, the millions in revenue waiting to be unlocked, none of it existed. I smiled, tight, polite, my insides roiling. I'm managing fine, Richard chuckled, not cruelly, but dismissively. You're still figuring things out. Jessica, now there's stability. She's the family's pride. Always has been. The words landed with the weight of inevitability, as if written into some family scripture that couldn't be erased. I stared at the chicken on my plate, cold now, uneaten. I wanted to slam my fist down, to scream that my payroll outweighed Jessica's salary, that my investors scrutinized me more than any partner at Thorne ever would. But I didn't. I folded the napkin, placed it neatly beside my plate, and excused myself with a smile that fooled no one. Hours later, the glow of my laptop filled the darkened living room. The Carter house was silent except for the tapping of keys and the low hum of determination in my chest. Deadlines, dismissals, doubts, all of it sharpened into fuel. I pulled up the investor dashboard, eyes blazing at the numbers that everyone else pretended didn't matter. My reflection stared back in the glass of the screen, tired, resolute. I muttered into the silence, words both a vow and a warning. I'll show them. They thought I was finished. I was only sharpening my blade. The words were a fire under my skin as I sat alone in the Innovate office. The city stretched beyond the glass like a restless ocean of lights. The hum of the building was quieter at night, no chatter, no ringing phones, only the low mechanical breathing of servers and the occasional sigh of the HVAC. It was here, in silence, that resolve turned to strategy. I scrolled through reports on my monitor, not about code or campaigns, but about law firms. Thorne and Associates, my family's temple, Jessica's throne. The name curled across every investor's demand, every recommendation, every veiled threat that without them, Innovate Series C could collapse. Yet buried in the gloss of prestige were cracks. I found them in case studies, in articles overlooked, in footnotes most lawyers hoped no one would read. Weaknesses in tech and intellectual property areas where speed and innovation always outpaced tradition. They excelled in mergers, in litigation, in presenting polish. But IP and fast-growth startups? Their record wasn't flawless. The door creaked softly, and Sarah stepped in, balancing 2 coffees, hair falling out of her bun. Knew you'd still be here, she said, setting one beside me. You're relentless, Emily. Relentless is the only way we survive, I murmured, eyes still locked on the screen. She leaned closer, scanning the highlighted notes. You're digging into Thorne? You know they're not going to let you off easy. I glanced up. Tell me what you found. Sarah hesitated, then pulled up her phone. I confirmed it. Jessica's on the pitch team. She'll be in the room, across from you. Investors will eat it up. The air seemed to thicken, pressing against my lungs. Jessica, walking into my boardroom, her smile rehearsed, her aura polished by years of applause. The thought stung, but it also steadied me. If she wanted to step into my world, she would find it wasn't her courtroom. It was my battlefield. Let them come, I said, voice low, sharp. They don't realize they're walking into a trap I've been setting for years. I don't need to humiliate Jessica. I just need her to underestimate me. That's when I strike. Sarah watched me carefully, her expression shifting from concern to something fiercer belief. Then we make sure everything is airtight. We'll turn their strength into weakness. I nodded, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I opened a blank document, words flowing not like notes, but like prophecy. One day, Jessica will stand before me, and I will not bend. Each keystroke was an oath, harder than steel. The screen dimmed for a moment as a notification slid into view. Calendar alert. Pitch. 2 weeks. I stared at it, the countdown a pulse on the screen, relentless and inescapable. 2 weeks until everything converged: family, business, betrayal, and justice. 2 weeks until the blade I had been sharpening finally found its mark. Every toast to Jessica was a knife in my back. Crystal glasses clinked beneath the glow of chandelier light, laughter rolling through the Carter home like music played only for one audience. The air smelled of expensive wine and Susan's lavender candles, mingling with the faint bite of autumn seeping in from the open patio doors. The house had been polished to perfection, as though the walls themselves were preparing to celebrate Jessica's ascension. I stood near the edge of the crowd, a practiced smile fixed on my lips, as Richard raised his glass yet again. His voice carried easily over the chatter, rich with pride. Our Jessica may be the youngest associate in her division, but mark my words, by this time next year, she could be partner. The relatives erupted in applause, their glasses flashing like stars as they drank to her future. Beside me, Jessica basked in it, chin tilted high, a gleam in her eyes that wasn't humility, it was ownership. She thrived on this worship. She turned her glass toward me, her smirk hidden behind the rim. And Emily, she said, voice light but barbed, is still pouring her heart into her hobby project. What is it again? That startup thing? Something with apps? The laughter was subtle but sharp, a ripple of amusement that made my ears burn. I forced a sip of champagne, the bubbles bitter on my tongue. My company had contracts, deadlines, payrolls that carried weight far beyond her courtroom briefs, but here none of that mattered. To them, Innovate was a child's toy compared to Jessica's throne. Grandma Mildred leaned over, whispering loudly enough for half the room to hear. At least Emily is steady. She can always help Jessica with the little things. What's that called again? Clerical work? The words drew another round of chuckles. My chest tightened, but my face did not crack. I caught my reflection in the window across the room, shoulders squared, lips pursed, eyes steady. Inside, though, I was already writing the ledger of every slight, every dismissal. The room fell briefly quiet when Jessica raised her glass herself. Family means lifting each other up, she declared, her tone dripping with sanctimony. Then she added, almost playfully, Emily, when you're ready to quit that startup, I'll find you a desk. I'm sure there's always room for an extra pair of hands at the firm. The words pierced deeper than the laughter. A desk. An extra pair of hands. She might as well have said servant. My father chuckled warmly, as though Jessica's condescension was simply clever wit, while Susan beamed with maternal pride. No one defended me. I set my glass down slowly, the faint ring echoing louder in my ears than the laughter. And then, instead of breaking, I smiled, a small, faint curve of lips that carried no warmth, only promise. I met Jessica's eyes, letting her see none of my anger, only the cool steel underneath. The desk you'll see me at won't be yours. Investors don't care about family drama. They care about results. The boardroom lights cast a white, clinical glow across the polished table, bouncing off the unopened water bottles lined neatly at every seat. I had been here 100 times before, pitching, persuading, holding ground, but this time the atmosphere was suffocating, tense enough to squeeze the air from my lungs. Across from me sat Mr. Klein, his expression granite hard, his fingers drumming against the tabletop in a rhythm that spoke of impatience. Beside him, Mrs. Rodriguez adjusted her glasses, her sharp gaze slicing through every hesitation. They were not family, they were not friends, they were gatekeepers to Innovate's survival. Mark shuffled the papers in front of him, his jaw tight, eyes darting nervously toward me like a drowning man searching for a lifeline. Dana, normally so poised, tapped her pen against her notebook until it clicked like a metronome. I could feel their fear rising, the awareness that one misstep today could mean the end of everything we had built. Klein leaned forward. His voice was low, deliberate, almost surgical in its precision. 2 weeks! That's what you have to secure a credible law partner. Without it, Series C is off the table. He paused, letting the silence bear down like a weight. Fail this, and your funding collapses. Rodriguez nodded, adding with a hint of disdain, startups fail all the time. If you can't show us you've got the right counsel to protect intellectual property, then why should we trust you with our capital? Mark's face drained of color. But we've been, he faltered, choking on the words. Dana tried to smooth it over, her voice cracking just slightly. We're exploring several firms. I raised my hand, cutting both of them off. Panic was useless here. I had learned that from years of being underestimated. Calm was my weapon. You'll have your law partner, I said evenly, my voice steady against the storm building around me. And not just credible exceptional, the kind that makes competitors second-guess themselves. Klein studied me, his eyes narrowing as though testing for weakness. But I didn't blink. The meeting dragged on, more numbers, more projections, but the ultimatum had already carved itself into the air. 2 weeks. Innovate's fate teetered on the edge of a calendar. When the investors finally left, the room deflated, the silence deafening. Mark buried his face in his hands. 2 weeks? That's impossible. Dana exhaled sharply, frustration trembling in her voice. Jessica's firm is pitching at the same time. If they win them over? Sarah appeared at the door, tablet in hand, voice calm as ever. The schedule just came through. Thorne and Associates will be in the boardroom on the 12th. Jessica Carter is listed as lead counsel. Her name hit the table like a gavel. I felt every muscle in my body tighten, but I forced my expression into stillness. This wasn't humiliation in a backyard. This was war on a battlefield I knew better than anyone. I gathered my papers, stacked them neatly, and looked at my team. They were unraveling, but I couldn't. Listen to me, I said quietly, each word deliberate. We will not lose. We will not collapse, because I refuse to give Jessica the satisfaction. Mark looked doubtful. Dana looked exhausted. But Sarah met my gaze with the faintest nod. She understood. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping the floor with a sound that cut through the tension. And I spoke the only truth that mattered now. Then failure isn't an option. Not every relative was blind to the truth. The chill of autumn clung to the air, crisp leaves skittering across Aunt Carol's porch as dusk pressed its violet hand across the horizon. I sat on the creaking swing, its chains groaning under every gentle sway, listening to the faint hum of crickets beyond the hedges. For once, I wasn't bracing for a storm of mockery or a hollow toast to Jessica's brilliance. Carol had asked me to come alone, and something in her tone had been heavier than small talk. She brought out 2 steaming mugs of tea, setting one in front of me with a nod. Her hands were worn, nails short, movements efficient. She wasn't like the rest of them. Her voice had always been quieter at family gatherings, her smiles more restrained, her eyes sharper. Tonight, her silence felt deliberate, like she had been rehearsing words for years. I've watched you sit through it, she said finally, lowering herself into the chair beside me. Every dinner, every party. They don't even realize how cruel it is. But I see it, Emily. Her gaze cut through me, steady and knowing. My throat tightened. They don't mean harm. At least, that's what I tell myself. Carol's lips curled, not in amusement, but in something closer to sorrow. That's what keeps you tolerating it, excusing it. But Jessica, she leaned forward, lowering her voice. Jessica thrives on it. I froze, the steam from my tea fogging my glasses as her words settled. It was one thing for me to know the truth, to feel the sting every time Jessica made the world her stage. But to hear Carol say it aloud, it stripped away the protective layer of denial I had worn for years. She's arrogant, Carol continued, almost spitting the word. I was at a lawyer's party last month. She thought no one was listening, but I heard her laughing about your company. Said Innovate was a cute little hobby, that she'd crush it if she ever wanted to. My pulse quickened, heat flooding my chest despite the cold air. I pictured Jessica in her sharp suit, drink in hand, mocking the company I had bled to build. She wasn't just ignoring me. She was actively underestimating me, flaunting it for others to enjoy. Carol reached for her tea, her hands steady. Her pride will be her downfall, Emily. Mark my words. She struts like the world owes her everything. But pride like that always cracked. Something shifted in me then more than anger, deeper than resentment. It was clarity. Jessica had already made her fatal mistake, and she didn't even know it. She thought she was towering over me, untouchable, but she was already standing on a cliff edge. All I had to do was wait for her to step forward. I leaned back against the swing, staring at the porch light haloing in the cool air. Carol's words looped in my head, a steady rhythm that sounded less like warning and more like prophecy. Jessica mocked Innovate because she couldn't imagine me capable of fighting back. That blindness would be the weapon I would never have to forge. I turned to Carol, my voice low, controlled, every syllable vibrating with intent. Then I won't stop her from walking into my trap. The night before battle, every scar burned fresh. The office was dark except for the glow of monitors, casting long, angular shadows across the glass walls. Innovate had never felt so silent, so charged. The hum of the air conditioning was steady, but every few minutes the distant wail of a siren outside broke through. A reminder that the world was still moving while I stood suspended, preparing for the strike I had waited my entire life to deliver. Sarah sat across from me, her face pale under the blue light of her laptop. Stacks of printouts fanned across the table, financial projections, technical specs, competitor analyses, legal footnotes. The numbers were sharp, unforgiving, like blades honed for combat. Mark paced near the whiteboard, muttering about last-minute tweaks, his hands smudged with dry erase ink from writing and erasing the same figures a dozen times. I wasn't pacing. I wasn't muttering. I was still. Still, but not calm. Inside, every word of mockery, every dismissal, every sneer from family gatherings rose like ghosts around me. Cousin Dave's snide joke about being the family secretary. My father's sigh when he told relatives Jessica was the family's pride. Jessica herself, with that careless smile, offering me a desk in her empire. They didn't fade with time, they festered. And now, on this long night, they stitched themselves into armor. Everything lines up, Sarah whispered, sliding another folder toward me. The data proves our valuation. The product is solid. What they can't deny is the traction. We've got the numbers, Emily. Mark stopped pacing, rubbed his temples. The investors won't care about the story. They'll care about risk. If Thorne comes in polished with Jessica leading, they'll look safe. We have to look stronger than safe. We have to look inevitable. I tapped the folder with a fingertip, my voice steady. That's exactly what we are. They looked at me like I had said something they wanted to believe, but hadn't dared until now. And maybe they were right. Maybe tonight was the first time I had said it aloud with no hesitation. Innovate wasn't just my company. It was the battlefield, the weapon, and the verdict. The hours bled together. We rehearsed responses to impossible questions. We adjusted slide after slide, swapping phrases until each word cut with precision. Sarah rehearsed with me, pitching mock arguments like a relentless opponent, her eyes gleaming with focus despite the exhaustion. Mark fine-tuned technical visuals until his voice cracked with fatigue. But between the strategy and the data, there were the memories. I let them come, let them fuel me. Jessica's laughter at that lawyer's party, telling strangers that my company was a hobby, my mother's patronizing pat on the arm, my father's constant reminders of Jessica's partner track. Each insult replayed in my mind wasn't a wound anymore. It was a sharpened edge, a reminder that tomorrow wasn't just business, it was justice. At one point, Sarah dozed off in her chair, the glow of her laptop reflecting off her glasses. Mark slumped against the wall, scribbles half legible on the whiteboard. I stood, stretching, walking to the floor to ceiling windows. The city stretched out before me, endless and glittering. Somewhere out there, Jessica was probably sleeping soundly, convinced tomorrow was her coronation. I whispered to the glass, my reflection staring back with eyes I barely recognized. Hardened, steeled. Tomorrow, she will kneel. The words felt final, carved into stone. I turned back to the room, committing every file, every strategy, every plan to memory. When dawn came, there would be no room for doubt. And then it happened. The black sky shifted, streaks of gold and orange cutting through the horizon. Morning light flooded the glass tower, spilling across the conference room table, blinding in its promise. When I pushed open the glass door, Jessica froze. The sound of it swinging wide echoed across the Innovate conference room, crisp and deliberate, like a gavel striking wood. For a moment, the air itself seemed to halt, papers poised mid-turn, chairs half pushed in, polite greetings suspended on lips. And there she was. Jessica Carter, polished in her navy suit, hair swept back in a perfect chignon, standing at the head of the table as though the room belonged to her. Her face betrayed her first. The practiced smile faltered, lips tightening, eyes narrowing as recognition crashed in. Color drained from her cheeks, leaving her flawless confidence cracked at the edges. I felt the ripple of it, the way silence expanded to fill every inch of glass and steel. All the years of being overshadowed, patronized, laughed at, they converged here, in the stunned wideness of her eyes. Mr. Kendrick, one of the firm's senior partners, cleared his throat, mistaking her hesitation for stage fright. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Jessica Carter, one of our brightest rising associates. She'll be spearheading Thorne and Associates' proposal today." His voice was smooth, authoritative, utterly convinced of the narrative Jessica had been feeding them. I moved further into the room, heels clicking against the polished floor, letting the rhythm mark my presence like a drum beat. Sarah slid into her seat at my right, her expression neutral but her eyes flickering with barely concealed satisfaction. I set my folder down in front of me, stacked neatly on the Innovate logo embossed in silver on the table. I straightened my shoulders and met every gaze before landing back on Jessica. "Thank you, Mr. Kendrick," I said, my voice calm, resonant. "But before we begin, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Emily Carter, founder and CEO of Innovate Solutions." The reaction was instant. Mr. Davies, another partner, glanced between us, eyebrows lifting. Sarah bit back a smile, lowering her gaze to her notes as though scribbling was more important than the unfolding theater. And Jessica swayed imperceptibly, as though the rug had been ripped from beneath her, her knuckles whitening as she clutched the edge of her folder. Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched. She had no script for this scene, no preparation for me being the one at the head of the table, the one in control. For years she had imagined me small, a shadow trailing behind her spotlight. And now, here, I was the stage itself. I leaned back in my chair, deliberately at ease, and gestured to the long table where the investors sat waiting. "Welcome to Innovate," I said evenly, each word dropping like a stone into still water. My gaze held hers, refusing to let her escape. "Please, impress me." The color drained further from her face, the perfect lawyer mask cracking as her throat worked around a swallow. She fumbled with the clasp of her leather portfolio, fingers trembling as she pulled out the first document. For the first time in my life, Jessica Carter wasn't untouchable. She wasn't adored, worshipped, unquestioned. She was a contestant on my stage, forced to prove herself under my scrutiny. Jessica opened her folder with shaking hands. Confidence cracked faster than glass. That was the first thought that cut through my mind as Jessica stood in the Innovate boardroom, shoulders squared but voice just a pitch, too high, too brittle. The gleaming table between us reflected her polished veneer, but the shine faltered, and everyone in the room could see the fissures forming. Mr. Kendrick leaned back in his chair, his tone dripping with reassurance, meant as subtle pressure. "Jessica, why don't you take the lead on this? No one knows this case study better than you." His faith in her sounded absolute, practiced after years of watching her stride into rooms and claim them without hesitation. He didn't see the tremor in her hand as she adjusted her notes. He didn't see what I saw, the arrogance from the toast at the Carter home, now souring into fear. Jessica launched into her presentation, her smile stretched thin. She quoted statutes with the cadence of someone reciting lines by rote, but the rhythm stumbled. Her eyes flicked to the slides, then to Kendrick, then back to me, as though gauging where the real power in the room resided, and then it came the slip. "According to Section 301, she began, "technology patents filed in the state can be exempt from—" She stopped abruptly, her brow furrowing. My lips curved, just faintly. "Section 301? She was grasping at half-remembered jargon, confusing state-level compliance with federal IP law. Investors shifted in their seats. Pens paused over notepads. I leaned forward slightly, my tone calm but cutting. "I think you mean Section 271, which defines infringement on intellectual property at the federal level. Section 301 deals with trade sanctions." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The correction landed sharp as a blade. The silence that followed was almost kind to her, but not to me. For me, it was electric. It was the echo of years spent being silenced, ignored, humiliated at family gatherings. Now, the roles had reversed. She was the one fumbling under the weight of 1,000 eyes. Jessica's jaw tightened. "Yes, of course, that's what I meant." But her voice wavered. Kendrick's brows drew together, his confidence cracking like the glass walls around us. Mr. Davies scribbled something quickly, no longer nodding along. Sarah sat at my side, and though her face remained politely neutral, I could see the gleam in her eyes, the satisfaction carefully masked behind professionalism. Jessica plowed ahead, trying to recover, but her words tangled in legal nuance she didn't command. Every phrase grew less assured, her sentences piling up like brittle cards in a collapsing tower. I waited until the pause came the place where she should have been strongest, outlining how Thorne and Associates would protect Innovate's intellectual property. Instead, she fumbled the definitions again, over-explaining, the nervous lilt in her voice betraying her. I leaned forward, folding my hands on the table, and let the question fall like a hammer. If you can't even define IP protection, I said slowly, meeting her eyes, without blinking, how can you protect mine? The words cut through the air, undeniable. Investors shifted again, this time leaning back, arms crossing, their expressions skeptical, evaluating. Jessica flushed crimson, her polished confidence crumbling into raw nerves. She glanced sideways at Kendrick, searching for rescue, for a lifeline that wasn't there. His lips pressed into a thin line, his fingers steepled as he watched her falter, and in that moment her silence louder than her words I knew the collapse had already begun. Jessica flushed red, glances at Kendrick nervously. Every trap I'd set was now closing. The room had shifted, the power currents unmistakable. Jessica stood pale before the table, her confidence long since shattered, her voice a thin thread unraveling with every word. Kendrick and Davies leaned back in their seats, the practiced composure of seasoned partners replaced by something taut, uneasy. They could sense it too, the ground tilting away from Thorne and Associates, the boardroom becoming my battlefield. I steepled my fingers and let silence stretch, a silence so heavy it made Jessica twitch. Then I spoke, evenly, like a professor asking a student to explain something they should already know. Miss Carter, perhaps you can clarify for us how you plan to address intellectual property concerns regarding AI-generated code under the latest federal guidelines. Her eyes widened. The question hung there, sharp as glass. She blinked once, twice, mouth opening without sound. She tried to summon something, anything, but only fragments fell out. Well, the regulations are evolving, and our firm, we anticipate. Her voice broke under its own vagueness. Kendrick's frown deepened. His hand flexed on the table, as if willing her to recover. Davies scribbled something again, his lips pressed tight. The investors across from me shifted uncomfortably, whispering to one another, unimpressed with the evasions. I didn't let the stumble pass. I pressed harder, my tone still calm, almost clinical. And what about the implications of AI models trained on proprietary datasets? How would you ensure our IP remains protected, not absorbed into someone else's algorithm? Jessica's silence this time was damning. She stuttered, papers trembling in her grip. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her standing hollow, stripped of the illusion she had spent her life curating. I leaned back slightly, my voice deliberate. It's interesting you can't answer, because I met with Garrison and Fields last week. They've already established a specialized division in AI IP compliance. They've filed 3 landmark cases in the past year. They came prepared. The effect was immediate. The room snapped alert. Kendrick's expression darkened. Davies exhaled audibly. The investors murmured with relief because I had given them the lifeline Jessica could not. And Jessica? She broke. Her eyes darted wildly, as though searching for escape. But there was none. Not from me. Not from the truth laid bare. Not from the years of underestimating me, culminating in this very collapse. Then, in the silence that followed, she did what I had imagined, but never fully believed I'd witnessed. She pushed her chair back, came around the table, and stood before me not as my sister, not as the family's golden child, but as a desperate associate with everything to lose. Her voice cracked, raw. "Please don't reject us," she whispered, and then louder, almost choking on the words. "Please, I'll make it right. Just give me a chance." She reached toward me, her manicured hands trembling, the same hands that once dismissed me with a pat on the shoulder. And then, in front of the investors, in front of her partners, Jessica Carter bent at the knees. The golden child, the untouchable daughter, kneeling in the boardroom where I ruled. I let the silence linger, let the image burn into the minds of everyone present. And then I spoke, my tone cold, unyielding. "Stand up, Jessica. This is business, not charity." For once, the golden child was coated in dust. The gleaming aura that Jessica wore so effortlessly at family barbecues and holiday dinners had cracked beyond repair. The shimmer was gone, replaced by the flat pallid look of someone who had been stripped bare in front of a room that mattered more than any backyard stage ever could. The boardroom had emptied with quiet efficiency, but the tension lingered like smoke. I gathered my notes calmly, my movements deliberate. There was no rush. I had already won. Jessica, by contrast, lingered in her chair as though it might anchor her to something solid. Papers trembled in her hands, unshuffled, irrelevant now. I stood, facing her directly. Thorne and Associates will not be moving forward with Innovate Solutions, I said, my voice smooth, final. We require partners who understand the terrain we're navigating. Unfortunately, your firm does not. I didn't raise my tone. I didn't need to. The rejection cut cleanly, leaving no room for doubt or appeal. Jessica flinched as though struck, her eyes darting to Kendrick for rescue. But Kendrick didn't move to defend her. Instead, he closed his briefcase with a single, decisive snap and stood. "Thank you for your time, Miss Carter," he said to me. His words formal, detached. A handshake offered out of duty, not camaraderie. Then he turned to Jessica, his expression heavy with the weight of a man whose reputation had just been dented. "You've embarrassed this firm," he said flatly. "No anger, no theatrics. Just truth. Cold and irrevocable." His voice echoed in the cavernous lobby as we exited the boardroom, every syllable searing into Jessica more deeply than any scolding could. Her shoulders collapsed inward. She couldn't meet Kendrick's eyes, nor Davies's, who avoided her altogether, already drafting in his mind how to explain the fiasco to the partners back at the firm. Jessica, the rising star, the favorite child, was suddenly radioactive. We descended the marble staircase together, but the space between us was more than physical. Mine was the stride of someone stepping into her rightful place. Hers, the stumble of someone who had been dragged down from a pedestal. Her heels clicked unevenly against the polished floor, too loud in the silence of her disgrace. She tried to pull her blazer tighter, as though fabric could shield her from the stares, from the unspoken judgment of the investors watching from a distance, of Sarah waiting at the elevator with calm poise. Jessica's chin trembled when she attempted a neutral expression, but her mask failed. At the exit, Kendrick didn't bother waiting for her. He strode ahead, Davies beside him, both men walking with the briskness of those eager to put distance between themselves and failure. Jessica remained behind, clutching her folder like a lifeline that had already snapped. I paused, watching as she finally forced herself to move toward the revolving doors. For the first time in her life, she walked out of a room diminished, not exalted. There were no toasts, no applause, no proud parents bragging at her side. There was only the hollow echo of shoes on tile and a silence that spoke louder than any cheer. Jessica left with shoulders caved in. This time, silence was louder than laughter. The dining room of the Carter home had always been filled with noise forks scraping plates, Richard's booming voice, Susan's doting commentary, and the chorus of relatives praising Jessica's every move. But tonight, on Susan's birthday, the air was thick, muted, as if everyone had swallowed their words along with the roast beef. The candles flickered, shadows stretching long across the table, illuminating unease that no one dared speak aloud. I sat between Aunt Carol and Cousin Dave, my back straight, posture deliberate. For once, I didn't have to force my expression into something polite. The tension around the table did the work for me. Richard kept clearing his throat, pretending to busy himself with pouring wine. Susan's smile faltered each time her eyes darted to Jessica, who hadn't looked up from her plate since the meal began. The golden child's shine was gone, replaced by the dull glaze of someone trying to disappear. Aunt Carol broke the silence first, her voice steady, cutting through the awkward clink of silverware. "Is it true, Emily?" She looked directly at me, not with doubt, but with a kind of knowing curiosity. "You're the CEO of Innovate?" Every fork paused midair. Susan's hand trembled slightly as she set her glass down. Richard blinked, searching for words that didn't come easily. My parents, so quick to exalt Jessica, were now stumbling, caught between pride and denial. All eyes turned to me, and in that pause I felt the weight of every past humiliation, every jab, every dismissal. Jessica remained frozen, her fork pressed into untouched potatoes. The color in her cheeks rose faintly, but she still wouldn't look at me. "Yes," I said finally, my voice calm, unshaken. "Innovate is mine." The words landed with finality, slicing through the quiet. They weren't shouted or embellished. They were simple, undeniable truth. The truth that had been hidden behind their blindness, their favoritism, their arrogance. Richard tried to open his mouth, but the words tangled before they could form. Susan shifted in her chair, smoothing the tablecloth as though that might erase the tension. Around the table, cousins glanced nervously at one another, waiting for someone to laugh, to break the spell. But there was no laughter this time. Even Aunt Carol stayed quiet now, her question answered, her suspicion confirmed. She gave the smallest nod, one only I noticed, and returned to cutting her food, as though she had done her part. The silence stretched long, heavier than any jeer I had endured before. For once, there were no toasts to Jessica, no subtle digs at me, no dismissal of my work. The weight had shifted, and they all felt it. They simply didn't know how to speak it aloud. No one spoke, the silence was heavy. I didn't need applause. Silence was enough. The hum of the engine filled the car as I steered through the city streets. Headlights washing over slick pavement, glistening with the remnants of a winter drizzle. Skyscrapers rose around me, each lit window a reminder of ambition, failure, triumph. Tonight, they felt different, not as towers I had to climb, but as piers in the skyline I already belonged to. My hands tightened on the wheel as memory after memory replayed. Richard boasting about Jessica while I lingered in the background, Susan patting my arm like a child who had tried and failed, Cousin Dave reducing me to the family secretary. Each sting surfaced again, but softer this time, dulled not by time but by vindication. I had carried those cuts like scars, yet now they no longer bled. I thought of Aunt Carol, her steady eyes that had seen through the facade long before the others dared to. She hadn't fought my battles, but she had recognized them. That mattered. In a family blinded by their own favoritism, even one quiet ally could feel like oxygen. I whispered a thank you into the darkness, though she'd never hear it. The silence of Susan's birthday dinner lingered in my mind, the way forks stopped mid-air, the way Jessica's gaze sank into her plate, the way no one dared utter a word after I spoke the truth. It wasn't revenge. Revenge would have been loud, dramatic, designed to wound. This was different. This was truth laid bare, stripped of denial, undeniable, even to them. For years I had whispered promises to myself in the shadows by the oak tree at the BBQ, in the quiet of my office at midnight, with pen pressed to paper in my journal. Promises that one day they would know, and tonight they did. I eased the car into the next lane, city lights streaming across the windshield like ribbons of gold and silver. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, not the invisible daughter they once dismissed, but the woman who had built something real, something lasting. They finally saw me, I whispered, the words trembling with both exhaustion and triumph. Ahead, the Innovation Tower loomed, its glass walls glowing against the night sky. My tower, my future. For the first time, the horizon didn't feel like a wall to break through, but a road opening endlessly before me. The lights of Innovation Tower ahead, future wide open. Beneath the weight of years of silence and humiliation, the truth finally stood unshaken, one sister's arrogance undone, the other's resilience crowned. What began as whispered vows of justice ended in the undeniable collapse of favoritism and pretense. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime, reminding us that power built on lies always falters. No wall of deception can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave your thoughts. Comment 1 if you felt the same fire of vindication, or 2 if you think justice could have been sharper.